Okay, I honestly believe that shame is the most silent nervous system dysregulator that almost nobody is talking about. And that's actually because of shame. It really hides in plain sight. And as we start to bring shame into our awareness and see how it really dictates the state of our nervous system, that is what is actually going to give people a true baseline of regulation, which is very different than just trying to do all of these somatic practices and meditations. And the more people that know about shame, I think the healthier as a society we will be. And that's really a big aim of my work, is to make people aware of if they have internalized chronic shame or not.
So what are the big indicators of that internalized chronic shame?
So I'll start with how we think when we are people that have internalized chronic shame. So we speak very at the level of identity. So I am the kind of person that does this. So to share from my previous experience, something that when I was really in functional freeze, whenever I would go from being very up to then kind of dissociating, scrolling on social media, or not really being able to stick to habits or rituals, when I was in these down states and I wasn't doing what I thought I should be doing, I had this internal narrative that, like, this is the real me, and the me that people see that is successful and, out there and doing things, that's fake. And I felt a lot of guilt and embarrassment and then shame on top of that when I was like, oh my God, I've somehow tricked people into thinking that I'm this intelligent, kind of have it together kind of person. So we think in these terms of, oh, this is the real me, or this is who I really am, often coupled with words like should. So should is shame in language, essentially. I should be this. I should be doing that. I should be better. And what that really creates is this version of you that you believe is worthy of having access to survival, which we get through safety and connection. And that version is not who you are right now. And that is debilitating to the nervous system.
So it's really, you're talking about depersonalizing it. You're not making it a part of your identity. You're recognizing that that state you're in is just a state.
Yeah. And I really like that you bring the word depersonalization into it, because that's also, if we look at kind of shame-based symptoms, it is oversensitivity because everything is over-personalized. And I think that it's been really interesting over the last few years, especially with, neurodivergence being something that a lot more people are aware of, and this idea of being a highly sensitive person. I think that there has been a lot of unconscious kind of masking of what dysregulated sensitivity is that comes from chronic shame versus just people being sensitive and empathetic, which we want to be empathetic. But what ends up happening, and I know what I did, was I'm like, I have ADHD and I'm so sensitive and I'm such an empath that, like, I can't be around many people all at once. And I really don't typically use this language, but it really leads us to this kind of like victim way of engaging with life, where like nobody understands how sensitive I am. And oh my God, kind of like poor me. When actually what ends up happening is you walk down the street and someone looks at you and maybe they're not even seeing you, or maybe they're enjoying your outfit, and your shame filter that your nervous system has developed is like, oh my God, that person sees something weird about me or thinks that I'm dressed weird. And you literally feel a full body contraction. And that one moment, that one micro interaction now dictates the flavor of the rest of your day, which just turns into a coping mechanism because somebody gave you what you perceive to be a weird look on the street. And that is over personalization in action that creates this cascade of a shame spiral that a lot of us are familiar with, which is this immediate deep physiological contraction and sensation in the body, a curling in your stomach, and then you probably need to go be by yourself. And you need to isolate, you need to curl inwards, and you essentially need to dissociate as a way of coping with the pain of experiencing shame. When a regulated person that has gone through the shame healing experience can see somebody give them a weird look on the street, and maybe it's not a good feeling, and you're like, oh, like, don't look at me like that. 5 minutes later, you've forgotten the interaction and you're moving on with your day. Way less disruptive, way more regulated, and you now just get to actually be present in your life, and that's it.
And what's the difference in how to get there? Because I feel a lot of people, this might have resonated with them of like, oh shit, that's me. And I love that we're bringing this up because I want to go back on the over personalization stuff. But I guess, how does somebody get to that point, first off, where it doesn't affect their whole day?
Yeah. So number one, which, this is true for anything that you're really trying to shift in your life, is acknowledging that this is what you're experiencing, which can be kind of a nuanced action to take, because to admit that you are over personalizing that much and that it feels out of your control is a very vulnerable and scary thing to do. And this is where vulnerability in the case of shame healing is like the core medicine. And Brene Brown talks a lot about this, and she's done a lot of really incredible research on shame specifically, and how vulnerability is pretty much the main principal ingredient to being able to what I call de-shaming, or removing or healing this kind of shame-based filter through which you see yourself and the world. And so, one thing, I had a shame healing program earlier this year, and I'm talking about it. And one thing that a lot of people that have, chronic shame experience is they will literally do whatever it takes to suppress their basic body function so that it does not interfere or become noticeable to other people. And you have different levels to this. There's the person that will literally not go to the washroom when they're on the plane, because to be seen needing to go to the washroom in front of a plane full of people is too intensive an experience for them. And then you have the people like me where, in a work environment, if one of my ideas was not taken well by somebody that was my superior, that would mess with me for absolute days. And so when it comes to healing from these, it's literally number one, how accepting are you of your basic body needs? Do you eat, food regularly? Do you go outside? Do you go to the washroom when you need to go? If you're in the middle of a work call and you need to go pee, can you actually pause and go? Or are you suppressing your body and seeing your body's natural cues as an inconvenience and something that is just annoying? That is literally base level nervous system regulation. And a lot of people will go more towards doing like a heart coherence meditation than going to the washroom without their phone and making sure that their body is nourished properly. And that is really where we start with shame healing, is number one, acknowledging that you do experience shame and that you have this identity level experience of yourself as being inherently deficient in something that you often cannot quite put your finger on. That's deeply painful, and you need to admit that. And then two, actually kind of this question I just posed is, how accepting are you of your body's basic needs? And what is your relationship with your ability to fulfill those needs for yourself? That's where I really get people to start.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great place to start, because it almost seems like you said, people would go to a heart coherent meditation and they'd do all these somatic practices, and they're bypassing like the thing that happens on the micro day to day that's actually creating the symptom in a lot of ways. So I love that. I want to circle back to over personalization. I love this conversation because of where social media is at, I think, and making everything about our feelings and us and yes and type of conversation. I don't know. I don't really have a question. I just want to talk about it because it's important to talk about, where, I think the culture of Instagram specifically can, even in the healing space, you're doing all this inner work, can be, I hate to use the word toxic, but not unhealthy. And one of those things is over personalization. I guess, what have you seen in the space, and how have you seen this played out either with clients or yourself?
Yeah, I'll actually, literally right before we just started recording this, I'd posted something on my Instagram story of this concept I've really been developing called low-level chronic dysregulation. And, this is really what a couple of my upcoming programs are all about, is kind of like leading people out of low-level chronic dysregulation. And so I'd shared, here are kind of some of the symptoms. Here is a page where I talk about the symptoms of it. And then, hey, here is what I created based on my lived experience. It's a program, like a 2-part workshop series. And I kind of just immediately had this woman respond being like, it's kind of ironic that you talk about self-help and then immediately try and, charge money for something. And it seems like you could just make this a free resource. And it really, like, to me, it was a little bit of this, like, what? Like, who are you to impose that on me in the way that I'm running my business and running my social media page? And so that is what I have seen and experienced a lot of. To just give you one example, is I think that over personalization comes out as entitlement. So it's like a lot of people, and you might even see this or other creators as well, you post something, and when you don't say it or deliver it in a way that somebody wants you to, they literally feel like Dana, who doesn't even know who I am, has specifically done this in order to irk me or bother me, or knows that whether this is something I can't afford, she did that on purpose. And it creates this level of entitlement And what I think that a lot of the time this is related to is shame and often embarrassment of like being in a place where to be so emotionally reactive and to kind of have that response to somebody who's, sharing on social media, in my opinion, I'm like, that has to be a deeply unenjoyable experience to have, and to be in a body where that is your response to go and like message the person this. And I've gotten other, really, really aggressive comments that I'm not going to speak out loud because they're pretty weird. But that's something that I have seen a lot of. And then one example I want to give that's very different, but I just feel like so many people relate to this, is something I've heard a million times. And I love my mom, and she totally does this. I'm in the house, we're hanging out, whatever, and I will say like, oh, like this would have been nice, or could you help me with this? And then she can't do it or doesn't want to do it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, like that's kind of, annoying, like would have liked your help. It's like, oh, I guess I'm just a bad mother then. Like that kind of response.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people have experienced this with parents when you are also the person that in your family is likely now more emotionally aware, more nervous system aware, and you're trying to engage in like, a conscious way. And then your parents' reaction, because you're calling them out on certain things, is to over personalize and be like, I guess I just, a dad like didn't provide enough for you. And so I think those are also some ways that we can see over personalization in action, that whether you're a content creator or not, you've probably experienced something like that.
Most definitely. And it's crazy to me just in this conversation of like how that over personalization has a lot to do with shame, because shame is like saying that, oh, I'm something bad. And so it's living in the shadows, but then you're making everything about yourself. Is that because the self is trying to prove it's not in shame? Like, I'm curious why that would even happen.
Yeah. So this is where it's so fascinating to me, the shame and nervous system interaction or intersection, because essentially what ends up happening when we have this internalized chronic shame, and it's really kind of flavoring all of our interactions, is, and we've, heard people talk about like you have this, version of yourself that is acceptable to society. And that's kind of what shame does, but it's at a deeper level where we will have this version of us that shame essentially has told us is what is going to be accepted by society. But often, because that was developed during childhood, it doesn't even really make us that acceptable in our adult lives. So what ends up happening is our nervous system is trying to digest and metabolize the experience of this version of you that you believe is acceptable not being acceptable, but also your nervous system believes that that is the most predictable way to access safety, is to be that version. So what ends up happening is you have this constant internal hypervigilance through surveillance of your state, and you're surveilling the people around you, their micro expressions, their tone of voice, how they're even sitting next to you, or the language that they're using. And your nervous system is simultaneously trying to move towards them in order to connect, and trying to move away from them because you are also getting the signal that they're not responding to you well. And the reason that this happens is because we naturally, our nervous systems right now are responding to each other. We are co-regulating. We could also be co-dysregulating depending on, your state and my state. But what we can really pick up on is if I'm speaking with you and you are deeply in a state of shame that is causing you to try to perform, my nervous system is going to pick up on the dissonance and this kind of high level stress that's coming from you. So it's so interesting because you think that you're being this great version that's going to get acceptance, but actually because you're performing, other people are picking up on a state of stress from you and kind of trying to move away from you. And they're confused too. So it just creates this kind of, excuse my language, like clusterfuck of dysregulation driven by shame.
So interesting. That's like the scientific explanation for how your fears are being made manifest. Like that person who is trying to perform to be liked, is it that action is creating the thing you're scared of. So interesting. Humans are funny. How does this play out in?
They are.
I mean, this is on the topic of connection. Have you seen this or your work played out in intimate relationships, and how does that affect things there?
Yeah. Okay. I love this question. So So one thing that I'd really like to also kind of level set with here
Mhm.
is attachment. So the way that we have needs, like going to the washroom, eating food, having water, and like getting sunlight, we also have attachment needs. And this is where I think we have really failed as a society, and why so many people are dysregulated now is we don't even see attachment needs as being needs. We see them almost as like a cherry on top, like, okay, you grew up and you had food, you had water, you went to school, great. But your attachment needs, which comes from having people around you that essentially act as life guides and are able to take you through the proper psychosomatic maturation journey of going from being a baby to a toddler to a teenager to then being a woman and a man, and all of the physiological processes that you go through, plus all the emotional states that you go through. You're developing your own identity at the same time. Ideally, you want to be with parents or people that are able to help you nurture and develop an identity that you feel proud of, so that you actually can create a state of belonging in the world, but belonging through being what I call like your primal authentic self. So where you don't feel like you have a dissonance, or there's like a shadow version of you and a real version. It's like you've been able to literally develop as a being that is like, I know who I am, and I also know that I'm constantly evolving. And what my parents taught me was the tools and the security, essentially having secure attachment, to be okay with that and to allow myself to evolve and have the tools to actually do that and integrate that in a way where, I mean, it's never going to be seamless. It's the human experience, but where you're not, every time something changes in your body, you're not like whipped into a chronic frenzy. So because so many people didn't have that, this is where shame enters, where you essentially have been implicitly taught that your primal authentic self is not the self that you can show the world and survive.
Mhm.
You create this, this version of you that is the survival self, the performance self, whatever it is. And from this place, you engage in relationships with people. And when you engage in relationships with people from a place of shame, which can play out with anxious attachment, disorganized attachment, avoidant attachment, you are naturally going to seek out other environments where you do need to be the performance self in order to be in connection with other people. And this is where I also want to differentiate between what I would consider attaching and connecting. Connecting is where, like, you and I can be responsible for our own states and emotional experiences, and we are showing up more or less as our authentic selves, and we are consciously deciding to create a relationship together. You are able to communicate to me what your needs and wants are. I'm able to do the same, and we are consciously accepting, I want to meet your needs. I want to meet your wants, and I'm doing that. Versus when you are in a relationship where you are seeking attachment, usually this is self-abandoning. I need to not be Dana in order to be in connection with you. Because if I try and be Dana, I'm going to be shamed. I'm going to have connection or attachment withdrawn from me. And that doesn't feel safe, which goes back to the most primal part of our nervous system, which is we need to be with other people. We need to have some sort of attachment to other humans in order to survive. And that, beyond anything, is the principal driver of our human experience and our physiology, is to survive.
Right. And I think, and in some ways to attach, as you just shared, right? And like, I think that's interesting because
Absolutely.
with the attachment styles and a lot of stuff in the space, especially around relationships, it's like people are, it's like, okay, like I want to be in connection, but I shouldn't be attached at all. And oh, there's this attachment thing coming up and there's a problem. And it's like, well, that's also human, right? And just like
Mm.
even sometimes having a discomfortable internal experience or having some shame is also human. And at least I just want to speak to this. So you don't want to blanket the whole thing as that, or if it's chronic and that's your entire experience, then yeah, you have something to look at. But if it comes up, it doesn't, I don't necessarily, in my opinion, it's not necessarily like the biggest red flag. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I really love that you said this, because this is also something that I see in, the healing and spiritual community as,
Mhm.
and I don't know if this is the right term, like the new age spirituality, or just over spiritualizing things, where it becomes this thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to be so healed that I don't need anybody. Like whatever connections come to me or leave, I'm totally fine with it. And I essentially remain in this like, Buddha, like nothing bothers me. And I'm just so connected and I have such strong self-worth that I don't need that. And it's like, no, actually, the human experience is the range of joy, peace, ecstasy, all the way to shame and grief. And I love this saying or this view of the depth of your grief is the depth of your love. And I think that it's so true. And we're meant to experience the spectrum. And I also think like when I really look at the kind of relationships that I want to have in my life, I am actually I'm dependent on other people. And for a lot of the over spiritualization, that's like a big no-no. It's like, you don't want to ever like really outsource. They call it outsourcing, any of your happiness to other people. And I'm like, it's not outsourcing. It is, however, consciously choosing to have these people in my life and to invest in them and to let myself be supported by them and to depend on their regular, consistent investment into me as a person as part of what makes my life enjoyable and happy. And there is always going to be an aspect of attachment that is needed because we do need to be with other humans. However, I think what is so cool about the time period that we live in, especially, like as a woman, like I'm so glad I was born now and not in the 1950s. Like I can have a bank account. I don't, need to survive through a man. So the men that I get to engage with are men that I actually want to be with as people. And it's coming from a place of, wow, like I really enjoy you as a person and we can build something cool together versus just out of, survival and necessity. So I think it's actually, community and healthy interdependence with people is how humans are meant to live. And that's actually going to be the most nourishing for our nervous systems. But I think what's hard about it is that it means commitment. It means whether it's physically or emotionally, like there's staying power. In order to have really healthy interdependent relationships, you need to be with somebody over a period of time, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship. And I actually used to travel and live this like crazy nomadic life. And it was a huge coping mechanism. It allowed me to stay shallow in all of my relationships because I was never physically with people for more than a few weeks at a time or months maybe, versus now I really am settling more and I'm having these experiences of, oh, like what is it like to actually see the same people every single week for a year and be in the day-to-day of the human experience with them and like know that they eat tacos on Tuesday and that if they're not doing that, like, hey, I'm going to check in on you, like, are you okay? And those are the kind of relationships that I want to have. And I would be fucked if all of them got ripped away from me because I am deeply attached and connected to them. And that I believe is healthy.
And it's really great that we're having this conversation because I think a lot of people think that would be unhealthy. Oh, I have this codependent relationship with this person or this group of people. And it's like, well, no, you have a healthy attachment and you're human. We need each other. And what's the point if you're doing all this healing work and you're in your house all the time and you're not in connection? Like, so I absolutely love this conversation. I know we talked about a little bit earlier before we started recording, and you said you had a hot take on, I totally blanked on what it was before we talked about shame. Do you remember?
Okay. We were talking about oh my God, now I'm blanking too. I think that it was essentially, oh yeah, I think millions of people, especially I would say in like the West or more westernized countries, have trauma, but they don't even realize they have trauma. And they also don't want to identify with trauma because trauma, and this was me, like when I was literally in a full nervous system collapse, I was like, I don't have trauma. I just have like, I don't know, like there's some stress happening, whatever. Because my idea of trauma was being in a war zone. It was, what I was seeing in the movies of like insanely traumatic, like car accidents, deaths, like assaults, like all this stuff. And so a lot of people that have had attachment trauma, developmental trauma, and have had, like emotional trauma, plus something called evolutionary mismatch. I don't know if it's evolution, like there's evolutionary mismatch, and then there's kind of like the physiological response that comes from it. Most people in the Western world have these three types of trauma, and they have been low grade, chronically present in your life for most of your life. And that builds trauma in your body or a response to trauma in your body. And it's just such a different perspective of what trauma is that a lot of people don't even realize that that's what they're experiencing.
So what are those? And I don't even know what you said, the evolutionary thing. Like what is that? Big words.
Okay, so yeah, let's start with that one. So one of the things that I have found that has been different about the way that I approach nervous system regulation is I don't come from a psychology background. And so I really was like, why is it so hard to be regulated? Like that was my initial question. So I started doing research and read this book called what was it? Hunter Gatherer. I'll have to find the book. It's something about essentially having hunter gatherer physiology but existing in the modern world. And it's like, this is what I feel like for a lot of people, to a degree, some common knowledge, like, yeah, we're meant to be hunter gatherers. But what a lot of people don't really conceptualize is that from an evolutionary perspective, the pace of change of our environment, when we look at, evolution overall, has been so fast. Evolution in our physical bodies has not been able to catch up. So this is why, we joke about with the stress response, it's like our fight or flight is meant for if a tiger is chasing us. And it's like, ha ha ha. But actually, like it is actually meant for if a tiger is chasing us. Yet we have a similar response in our body when we get like a stressful email from a client that is, like really, really high maintenance or whatever. And because those types of threats that exist in our day-to-day life are much more present, it builds this lower grade chronic stress where we don't see something physically coming at us that could kill us, but our body is perceiving that as such. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is essentially the mismatch is our physiology is mismatched for its environment at a base level. So one of the main ways the evolutionary mismatch plays out, especially in the Western world, is through light. So for almost all of human history, we were outside all day. The only form of light that we could create ourselves was fire. And so this was at night. We would use fire. We'd also use it as a weapon or whatever. But now you can literally flood your apartment, your house with artificial light from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. Now, what happens is we have something called our circadian rhythm in our body that is deeply interwoven with our nervous system. Your eyes receive signals from the light outside. And when, let's say you're out at 7 o'clock in the morning, your body receives this signal, and this starts a 24-hour clock in your body that your nervous system is responsible for signaling that says, these are the hormones that need to be released. This is how much. And that is essentially a clock that you're supposed to move through each 24-hour cycle. Now, what happens when we are under artificial light all day is our body is not receiving the proper signals and is usually receiving the signal that it is the middle of the day all day. And so people have problems sleeping, then they take a sleeping medication, and it just like adds to this dysregulation. So this indoor lifestyle from a light perspective, in my opinion, is like the biggest dysregulator. And then you add on top of that, like a lot of the stuff that we know, which is, the amount of products that we're using every day. And the nervous system doesn't differentiate between stress. So if you are, using products that have all these chemicals in them that your body now has to figure out how to process and release from your body, that's a stressor. The air quality of your home is a stressor. And then you add on, if you've had this other, developmental and attachment trauma, essentially your allostatic load, which is the total like stress burden that your body can carry at any one time, it gets overloaded and overburdened, which then is what leads you to coping mechanisms because you literally can't handle anything else. So evolutionary mismatch is important to understand because you can do all of this healing work. You can do the meditations, you can like really, get good at conscious communication. But if your body quite literally doesn't know what time it is, you can look at a clock, but if you're not getting the proper light signals, if your body does not know what time it is, your physiology is disordered and it is disorganized internally. That creates automatically a low level stress in your body. Automatically.
Right. And so then living with that level of stress, what are the symptoms? Because you mentioned I know in your post that you just made right before jumping on this, you were talking about it. Can you hear me?
Okay.
You're back?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, you cut out for a second. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that, I experience a lot and a lot of other people do will be like when you wake up in the morning, you can have kind of, people tend towards two things depending on kind of where their nervous system is at. Either you wake up in the morning and you immediately feel like you're super activated, almost like your stress, your anxiety just like kicks in immediately. And your like heart is racing and you feel all jittery and da da da. You probably don't have much of an appetite. And maybe you're like me and you're just like going to drink a black coffee and you're like, yeah, I'm up. And you're just like on one essentially. And you're in this like pretty intensely activated state that if you had to kind of put the emotions to it, this could be like panic, anxiety, stress, like you're running through every single thing that you need to do during the day. This is also what makes you very susceptible, and it's very easy to then start reaching for your phone because this is it's feeding you essentially like the little dopamine hits that you need to stay in a state of activation. This is not what we want if we want to have a regulated mood, if we want to kind of be able to transition into the day. And like, yes, we want to have energy in the morning, but we kind of want to have this phase of, like we're waking up, like we're not going from 0 to 100. So that's kind of one way you can experience it. The other way is if your cortisol is just essentially shot, which this ended up happening to me, which is I would wake up in the morning and I was so lethargic. Like I did not have any peak of energy, and I would wake up and it was like moving through molasses to get out of bed. My eyes always felt like they were stuck shut. And it was like, oh my God, like just getting up and doing anything felt so difficult. And like, this is depression. This is collapse. This is this like really too down regulated because your hormones are also not functioning properly. This could be when like, yeah, you want to reach for a coffee. Some days you have a big appetite, other days you don't, but typically you don't have enough emotional regulation or energy in the body to make the choice of having a healthy breakfast. So for me, this looked like I'm going to literally Uber Eats Starbucks and like a croissant to my house in the morning because I'm just so dead already that this is what I need. So that's kind of two, morning experiences that can be very typical depending on if you're so depleted that you have no energy or if you're still pretty chronically in like this activated state.
Gotcha. And so those are symptoms then of this low level stress, kind of like living chronically.
Yes.
Yeah. Because that just sounds normal. Like I feel like that's just that just sounds like how people are. But it's not just because it's normal doesn't mean it's natural. So I guess what are some steps that people can do then to get rid of that low level stress once they start identifying with this, and also maybe if you could paint a picture of what's available, what is not there, because again, if it's all you don't know see anything different or think that anything different could be available for you.
Yeah. So, okay. This is where it's like such an interesting challenge for me to intersect the, physiological components of nervous system regulation with the emotional ones. And this is something that I think is really important, and that people that are on the emotional side or on the physical side, they don't acknowledge this, is you have to have some level of belief that something is going to help you to be able to stick to it at all. And so I really want to start with that because you can like know, or you can hear me on this podcast talking about like morning sunlight and blah, blah, blah. But if you've been really chronically dysregulated for a long time and you feel like you've tried everything, to you right now, the relationship that you have with this piece of advice might be like, oh, like here's just like another thing and it's not going to work. And so I just really want to acknowledge and validate that is a very normal response to have to, like another thing to try. And what I would also really invite anybody that's feeling that to consider is that this is what I would consider an ancestral-based principle. So we're literally looking at how did our ancestors live, because I could go off on this, but they essentially had little to no chronic illness or chronic dysregulation. Yes, like they could absolutely have been eaten by a tiger and we don't have that, and that's super great. But they did not experience the type of chronic symptoms that we experience today. So I would just kind of invite you to kind of consider and maybe look at what is the difference between waking up, putting a pair of headphones on to do breath work right away inside your unnatural lighting house without getting outside and doing it with a cup of coffee, versus what I would say, which is every single morning I brush my teeth outside. I don't look at my phone before that if I can help it, or I have my phone on red mode as a way of reducing the amount of blue light in the morning. And the first thing that I do is go outside and I brush my teeth. And then I have a glass of water with Celtic salt in it, which are minerals which our nervous system also needs for proper functioning because stress depletes our minerals. I drink my cup of water outside. Ideally, we want to get between 3 to 5 minutes of natural light exposure in the morning before exposing ourselves to artificial lighting. What this does is it starts that clock in your body saying, hey, it is, the morning, you're getting those proper signals from the sun. Also, a side note, if you're like me and you have glasses or you wear contacts, make sure you're not wearing contacts and put your glasses up, take your glasses off. This allows the proper light signals to actually enter into your eyes and go into your brain and kind of create this signal cascade. Literally just doing that for even like 4 days out of the week. I'm also a really big believer in it's really dysregulating to be like, I'm going to start doing this tomorrow and do it every single day for the rest of my life and be perfect at it. That's another way that underlying stress can show up. So giving yourself that like 80-20 permission, I'm going to try 4 days out of the week to like get outside and get this morning sunlight with your glass of water. If you can add on to that, depending on where you live, if you can have your bare feet on the ground or you can essentially ground your body, when we have this combination of sunlight, hydration, and connection to the earth, you're essentially charging your body and your nervous system. And on a physiological level, your body's essentially like a battery that we need to charge through different things. So that's like a really incredible nervous system overall health practice that you can incorporate at the beginning of your day. And on the emotional side, what this does is it provides this fun little opportunity and challenge of you're being present in your body when you're doing it. You're not on your phone. You're drinking a cup of water. Literally what you are doing is receiving sun and you are hydrating. That is what you are doing. And when with the nervous system and healing, we need to titrate, which is this idea of microdosing sensitivity in your body without getting overwhelmed. And so what we're doing is we're titrating, or we're giving you the opportunity to microdose presence in your body by connecting you with this ancestral based principle, getting the light in the morning and having this moment where maybe you're like, oh my God, I'm feeling sensations in my body because I'm not reading my emails. And now I actually feel like, oh my God, I'm really anxious this morning. Or, oh my God, I'm thinking about like great sex I had last night, literally whatever is on your mind. And you're actually in your body with that experience. And it gives us kind of this cool little like nervous system training to have 4 out of 7 days a week, if that feels good for you.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely love that. I hope that everybody was taking notes. If you didn't, go back and listen to that section again, because that was gold, definitely. And what I love about all this and the nervous system work is really you're talking about the capacity to implement a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about on the podcast, effective communication and a lot of stuff, the relational practices. If your nervous system isn't in a space to do the things that you should be doing, you're not going to implement it. You can have all the tools in the world, but you don't have the capacity or the space in your body because of low-level dysregulation or anything else. You're not going to implement it, and that can then further the story in your brain about your shame. And to see, I'm just not a good person because I'm not doing the thing that I know I should be doing. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah. So something that you had said earlier that I'm remembering to come back to is, so shadows and shame and like all of this, it's very related. And this is why I talk a lot about shadow work, and like Carl Jung, I just like love him. He's incredible. Also like completely psychotic, like most of the greats are. But so like when we're looking at applying nervous system regulation and capacity to relationships, and this is where shadow work comes in, is most people have this unconscious bias towards, I'm going to heal so much that I'm going to only experience good things in my relationship and I'm only going to have good conversations. When actually shadow work and nervous system capacity and self-confidence and self-worth and self-esteem is built by getting better at doing hard things, which means we need to embrace shadow work, which is like this messy human vulnerability of, you could like be sitting down to have a conversation with your partner and you're like, okay, I really know that this might sound really weird, but yesterday You didn't remember to make my coffee the right way. And I had this really ugly story in my mind that you are not paying as much attention to me anymore. And it really hurt me. And it's kind of been, sitting in my body. And I wonder, like, do you have a moment where we could kind of just like talk about that right now? Like, people get so icked out by having that kind of a conversation because like, I'm so needy, I'm so weird, like I should just get over it. But guess what? That is a really hard, vulnerable thing to do, to be like, look, on one hand, my cognitive, like prefrontal cortex is like, this is ridiculous. Like every other time he's made my coffee for me and it's totally fine. But your nervous system has maybe this old imprint of if someone's no longer paying attention, they no longer care. And so there's a deeper association that's present. And a healthy relationship, in my opinion, is a space where you can revisit these patterns and to have a non-judgmental and ideally, not be shamed for bringing something like this up, while also you being radically responsible for processing that and not over putting the responsibility on your partner. And this is the shadow, right? Like this is not like a fun thing to see about yourself, but it's effective. The more you actually acknowledge what is truly happening, which is kind of the essence of shadow work, the more capacity you will build to be deeply uncomfortable and being like, this sounds so needy and immature, and I'm going to say it anyway. What is it like to actually be present in your body when you're saying that?
Bingo. I'm just gonna let that simmer for a second because that's the work right there. That's it. That's the real shit right there. That's what it is. And the over personalization is what gets in the way. I'm being too needy and versus like, no, this is what's here. And what I'm finding in my life, even right now, as somebody who's working on this continuously, is the more that I express the messiness, the more connection I feel to the people in my life. Versus for me, I had a pattern of trying to figure it out, have it packaged right and get it and then present it. So my work is because I would present it always, but once it was like a little bit polished and I had a good grasp on it and understanding about things, analyzed it. My work now is recognizing that in process of me trying to analyze it properly, the other person's wondering what the heck's going on. Why is Kevin being distant and X, Y, Z, and making it about them when it's not. And I care so much about them, which is why, you see, it's just a carousel. So I get it. I'm in that right now of like, all right, I'm going to share it messy and not complete. And that's been my work. And it's been rewarding because I'm looking for, and I think that everybody tuning in, look for the disconfirming experience that when I share or when I have this type of a conversation, what I'm scared is going to happen doesn't happen. And like show that to your brain so you can get rewarded for like wanting to do it again. That's what's been helpful for me.
I love that. And so like one thing that you just said reminds me, Brene Brown also said this. It's like shame and this, repression, which is, I mean, I could go off on like, if you've had a religious background, come from New Age spirituality, where it's like the messy, low vibrational, shame, grief emotions are like so not allowed. That ends up teaching us to move through the world looking for evidence that we do not belong. Versus what you're saying is, okay, actually, the messier we allow ourselves to show up, which does not mean we're not taking responsibility. It actually is, higher level of responsibility to show up like that. We are allowing ourselves to have the experience of finding out where we do belong and then being able to build evidence that there are many places and many people with whom we do belong when we are showing up in that messy, authentic way. And I just love that you said that.
Yeah. You find your true people. You find the safe spaces, you find the community that you were talking about where you can have that healthy sense of attachment to. And actually, that's where a lot of the medicine is. And I know that you create those spaces, which I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the work you're doing in the world and what you got coming up.
Yeah. So right now I'm in a really exciting time. I'm redoing my signature nervous system healing 101 course. This is like the first thing that I launched as like a group program a few years ago. And obviously have just been, learning so much since then. So that's coming up. That's going to be also a new format where you're going to have the option to do a 1-month live intensive with me where I'm going to have co-study somatic sessions. So if you're like me and you need body doubling to ever get through like an online course, and it can be really easy to just like buy a course and it just sits there and you don't do anything with it. That was a big piece of feedback that I took from people is the way that I'm going to deliver my course is going to be nervous system informed. So there's going to be live experiential somatic sessions. And this version of this course is really, really for what I would consider to be like these high functioning frozen people, where you really have this kind of either you're on, you're off, you can mostly meet the responsibilities of your life, but it feels like a freaking battle and torture to go through it. Also, if you're like me, you're maybe at the next level. It's like it creates this feeling that your potential is trapped behind some door and like you can never kind of quite get to it because you can't be consistent with things. So this program is really for those people, and we're going to work on some of the underlying patterns that you didn't learn, which goes back to the attachment and developmental trauma of, okay, how do you actually be present in your body transitioning between tasks? That's one thing that a lot of us really struggle with. And so we have that on or off. Other things that we're going to also be looking at is just baseline like nervous system literacy so that you can come out of the program understanding that there's a difference between using somatic tools and the relationship you have with your body, and that the relationship you have with your body and your nervous system gives you the foundation of knowing how to master the use of different somatic tools so that you can come into more connection with yourself. And here's a fun one. You're going to learn how to properly use coping mechanisms and dissociation, which there is a time and place for it. We don't, trying to be present 24/7 all the time is another way of overwhelming the nervous system. So I like to kind of say, like, we're just getting into the real shit. Like, I'm not gonna, sell you, you're gonna manifest $1 million. What I am gonna say is if you show up and you allow yourself to kind of be invited deeper into your body, and you trust your brain to learn the cognitive stuff, and you allow yourself to let go of that and actually start to descend into your body a little bit more, you are going to have the ability to wake up in the morning feeling more refreshed. You are going to be able to transition through tasks. You are going to experience way less shame. You're going to be able to do things like trying new sports without feeling like you immediately need to be good at them or you're a piece of shit. You're going to be able to much more actively engage in life while being present in your body and kind of being happy, that you are who you are. So that's coming up. There's also a shorter 2-part foundation series that I'm doing before that. So if you're new to my work or you're just kind of new to the nervous system, but what I'm speaking about resonates with you, that would be really good to check out.
Amazing. Well, and I absolutely love your Instagram page. So that'll be down below in the show notes below. Everybody go check her work out. Because when I saw your Instagram, I was like, this shit gets it. I honestly love your perspectives on a lot of this stuff, which is why I had to have you on the show. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in the world and for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. I reciprocate that. I think it's also, from like a woman's perspective, it's really incredible to see men that are holding what feels like a masculine frame and able to have these emotionally in-depth conversations. And so I really would just kind of wanted to, reflect that to you. And I think that that's so incredible. It comes through in, your content and the podcast. And I'm really excited that we got to have this conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We just out here doing it, where we're being ourselves, and that gets to be the medicine, which is awesome.
Absolutely.
Cut it at 50. It's there it goes. Yeah, I started lagging at the end there. Sorry.